Good morning and welcome back to another Warhammer 40k 9th edition video. As is usual, we're going to start complaining about it a little bit more because once again, Games Workshop is not kind of going in the direction that most people probably hope for. And we are already seeing signs of incredible bloat, not even more than 6 months into this whole Warhammer 9th edition issue. We were told this was supposed to be the streamlined edition, streamlining 8th edition into more of a quick game, an easier to pick up game, something that we can explain to our friends better. But we're getting to a point already where it's obvious that these changes that are coming down the pipe are only going to further complicate the issue. So from the top, let's start with this idea of they announced that there's 4 new codexes. So it was pretty exciting off the top when they said that we're going to get a new Necron codex. And not as exciting that there was going to be a new Space Marine Codex, especially considering how many Space Marine Codexes there were last year, just at the very end of 8th edition. So we're going to have 3 Space Marine Codexes in as many years, basically, not including all of the supplemental codexes that came out. And that's where my problem lies. So we have all these supplemental codexes that already come out, Iron Fists, Ultramarines, Iron Hands, whatever. I don't know how many there were. I'm not a Space Marine player. I just know that there was a bunch, something like 6. So you had the main Space Marine Codex at the end of 8th edition, plus the 6 supplementals, which is part of the reason why the Space Marine faction got so powerful. They had so many rules to choose from. So now, Games Workshop just announced that we're going to get 4 new codexes by the end of the year. I think in October is when they're supposed to come out. And they are the Blood Angels Codex, the Death Guard Codex, the Death Watch Codex, and the Space Wolves Codex. So we get one Xenos Codex, the Necrons, right at the start, which we all know is going to be full of inconsistency already because there's so many changes that are happening constantly that by the time the final Codex releases, that means we're going to have one Xenos faction that's definitely at the bottom of the bucket. But regardless of that, why would they release 4 codexes of more good guy Space Marines, basically? Yeah, the Death Guard's in there, but they're also just more Space Marines. They're the bad guy version, but it's not healthy for the game to continue pushing out the same things over and over again. People are going to get tired of it, especially in the competitive scene. I got to assume that some players just aren't keeping up with these codexes, and they're still playing with the old ones or finding other ways to download them, which exists, and I don't blame players for doing that. But it's already feeling like bloat with a Blood Angels, a Death Watch, and a Space Wolves Codex coming out. I just don't understand why they can't do something like have separate factions within the same Codex for the Space Marines, because this is just a cheap way to pad the idea that we're making releases consistent. They're coming out all over the place, blah, blah, blah. No, this is just a cheap money grab. I mean, the Blood Angels are still going to have intercessors, and they're still going to have heavy intercessors and assault intercessors, and that's going to be, the main stab of it. And there'll be a few extra units here or there that don't really make the Codex feel that different than the other ones, or, in a capacity that it could have just been subsumed into a greater Imperial Space Marine Codex. And I feel kind of the same way about the Chaos Space Marines. You have the Thousand Suns, they get a few demons. You have the Death Guard, they also get a few demons, which are pretty much interchangeable at this point. Zangors versus Plague Horrors. I don't understand really the difference there. I mean, they're just meat shields. But at the end of the day, you could really have just, I guess, one main Chaos Space Marine Codex, and then one that represents the more specific god-aligned factions of the Death Guard, the Thousand Sons of the Emperor's Children. And that would be 2 separate codexes, but generally speaking, they kind of just support each other. And I feel like they should do the same thing with the Space Marine one. You have one generalist Space Marine Codex, and then one follow-up that is kind of like the supplements from last year, but just combine all the supplements into a kind of tertiary Space Marines Codex. But the thing that bothers me with this many codex releases is this is how you get bloat. Because every one of these codexes is going to have little rules here that are different, little rules there that are different. People are going to start souping however they want. And that's a huge problem for the game overall. My next issue is this change to the core unit type. And I understand it's because they don't want these aura abilities continuing to rain havoc all over the game, especially with the Space Marines. But it's an addition that should have happened at the beginning of 9th. It should have been printed with 9th, right? How is it that we're not even 5 months into 9th edition and there's this huge change coming down the pipe that wasn't in the release of the 9th edition Codex rulebook. I don't really understand the reasoning for it being so late. You would think that this close to the actual release of the code or the 9th edition rulebook, that they would have known this was in and they would have had to push it back a little bit. Some change to have made it into the codex, right? But here we are. Now we're gonna have chapter approved or some beta rules that are running for a little while in the background. They're not actually printed anywhere when you're playing a game with somebody and they say, "Oh, why doesn't my captain get the reroll to ones anymore?" They have to point to the Games Workshop community page and say, blah, blah, blah. It's not an online game where this is an easy thing to do, where all the updates are just baked into it, right? Having to pull out your phone to prove to somebody that they can't use the tactic that they wanted to use isn't a good way to play the game. And especially when they're changing things this frequently. And there was one more thing I wanted to say before I totally forgot about it. It's the new tactical deployment game type that has all this new terrain that's coming with it. And that actually does have supplements as well. So now not only are we getting supplements for factions and their codexes, we're getting supplements for actual game types that has happened in the past before. But for whatever reason, it just feels like this is something that's being tacked on that should have been part of the initial rulebook to begin with. The way that terrain is arrayed here, it shows that you can deploy terrain based off of point types and the kind of terrain that it is and your faction at the beginning of a tactical deployment game. Now, it's good that they're doing this in a way that it's supplemental to the main game, so it's not like we have to rethink terrain to begin with, but terrain's been in a kind of a rough spot the last couple of years anyways, so I'm not really sure if this is going to be the kind of change that we want, to give terrain special rules to make the units different when they're inside of them. I kind of like that idea. I do think that it will kind of go to my idea in one of the earlier videos about giving certain levels of terrain special abilities that kind of balance out what it's supposed to represent on the table, i.e. heavy terrain giving you an invulnerable save instead of just a bonus to your cover save, things like that. As if they can introduce some of that through this supplemental, I think it will kind of promote the idea that I was saying, that this is all kind of just beta testing, just throwing spaghetti at the wall again. But this new supplemental, it does feel, again, like more bloat because of what it's doing to the terrain. But, I was saying some of this bloat can be in the good direction, and I think this is an example of that. I believe that if the terrain performs well enough in these new terrain supplementals, especially the provision where they each get special abilities and kind of change based off of what they're actually representing on the tabletop, that's probably good in the long term for how they're going to use terrain in this game moving forward. So this is a change that I do like. This is the kind of bloat that we do want to see, stuff that's really changing the way the game plays in significant and fundamental ways to make it feel more realistic on the table. Those are the kind of changes that we're looking for. I know the core rules kind of do that, but they also kind of don't, because I don't see why a captain that makes everyone else around him reroll ones can't reroll ones himself. I think it's a skill that, and it really depends on how you want to read into the lore. But this change in particular, I would say I'm looking forward to it. I would like to see how it plays out, and I hope it doesn't go too far. And that's one of my worries, is that because it is bloating very hard on this, you're seeing these data sheets come out for this terrain that really, really just adds a new wrinkle to what you need to know in the game. Already you need to know all these different factions and their codexes and the supplementals, but now there's, say, an engine shed. You have to know exactly what the special rules are for the engine shed, instead of just saying, okay, well, that's a big piece of terrain, here's plus, again, this goes back to my desire for more universal special rules and yada yada. I've said that enough, but this is the kind of thing that we do need to see to make the game feel more dynamic and realistic, is something where it makes the terrain feel more dynamic and realistic. So I'm excited for this. We'll see how it rolls out, but it's something that needs to be mentioned if we're talking about bloat and changes in the game. They're not all negative, even though it might seem like I'm being very negative all the time. This is one that does excite me, right? I know in 7th edition, the changes that came through was like once a year there was a chapter approved, and that was it. And that wasn't that long ago. It's not like the advent of the internet has changed this game so drastically. The internet was still around then. But just generally speaking, it doesn't feel like these articles coming out are the kind of articles that we want to see. Changes here, new codexes here, in the wrong direction that you weren't expecting, and just general, there's all these weapon profiles that are changing. Blast weapons were introduced in a weird way. all of this doesn't really jive well with making the game less complicated, and it really promotes this idea of bloat. And I just feel that this is kind of breaking the ice to see how much level of bloat is going to be acceptable in this edition. And it frankly, it worries me pretty significantly that we're not moving in the right direction here for bloat. I think by the end of 9th edition, bloat's going to be just as bad, if not worse than it was in 8th edition. I mean, since technically it's all still here from 8th edition, they didn't cut it out. They're, oh, this edition still works with 8th edition codexes and all that. I mean, we're still going to have that same problem. So this goes along with the other issues that I was saying about all the armies having to learn so much about each other and just have this whole kind of idea that you have to be so knowledgeable across the board on what every single weapon does, and then they're changing the weapon types and abilities, and I have to know better what a melta does or what it doesn't do, and is it a multi-melta? And it's all of it is just kind of, it's too much. It's a barrage. Maybe 6 months down the line, a year down the line, it's kind of, you just rip the band-aid off. We're going to release another Codex 9.5 or rulebook 9.5, and all the rules will be consolidated there and blah, blah, blah. But then you have everybody that bought the initial, Indominus box with the rulebook say, oh, well, I wasted my money on that rulebook. There's no way to really win on this one. To me, I think the best way to have won would have been to just slow roll it. Instead of releasing 9th edition all of a sudden in the middle of a pandemic, say, oh, we have a pandemic, now we have an excuse not to release it because we haven't been able to play test it. Give it another year. Figure this core rule stuff out. Figure out how you want to make the melee armies work. Figure out how you want the armies to play against each other. And I know I've heard that there's like this 2-year gap between releases and when they start planning for releases, but it doesn't feel like that. It just feels kind of haphazard. So, maybe one day they'll get it together, but as of right now, it just doesn't feel good. Feels more like bloat. But I'm not gonna lie, it is still fun to theorycraft. It's still fun to play the game. I'm having a good time playing it when there's like a gentleman's agreement in place where we're not gonna just stomp all over each other. It's pretty nice, but I still miss 7th edition. I haven't felt any differently than that since 8th edition first released. But maybe as time goes on, they'll figure it out with more and more of this bloat. Maybe one day one of these articles will come out that instead of being, hey, we're bloating this much, it's going to say we're cutting all of this out and we're making universal basic rules again and blah, blah, blah. I don't know where they're going with it. It just still feels kind of like throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. But, once they get everything aligned, I think it'll be a good edition. But for now, it's still kind of a wait and see edition, I would say. So that's all I had to say about this one. I figured it's been a little while since I made a video, so here we are making more videos about Warhammer 40k and complaining about it because that's all anyone knows how to do nowadays, is because every single fan base is toxic. I figured, why not join the toxicity? So here we are. Have a good afternoon. Enjoy your 40k. Hey, at least we got a lot of new models to paint, especially if you're a Space Marines player. So have a good one and enjoy some of that painting. Bye.